So, are you feeling stuck in old habits with food? Maybe you are just desperate for change. And do you want to understand how to generate change from the roots up rather than simply changing surface behaviors that never stick? Now, this podcast will give you a deep dive into shifting identity for long term change. And I'm drawing on James Clear's work, the author of the life changing book Atomic Habits. I'm Harriet Frew, and this is the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. I've personally recovered from bulimia and worked as a therapist in eating disorders and body image for over 20 years. So if you're looking to heal your food relationship, you might also be interested in my Food Freedom app. But let's dive in. Now, I was in the murky depths of bulimia, grinding maximum willpower to manage an extra day without purging. I was really white knuckling it. I felt like I could fall off the cliff at any moment into one ginormous binge that would set me back for days. Despite this, somewhere within, I knew I would recover. Now, somehow, someday, deep in my bones, I really sensed it, but I really had no clear evidence for it. I had no plan of action, and I had no guru to guide me and airlift me to safety. In fact, the opposite was true. Days were spent obsessively restricting, over-exercising, binge eating, often at 4 p.m, buying donuts, toffee crisps, Doritos, spending money that I didn't have on food that would barely be tasted, stuffed down in milliseconds, later to be purged, and I'd wake up the next morning I just feel so mortified and ashamed, vowing that I would never ever do this again. And until, of course, I did. Now, how could I have possibly known that I would recover? Certainly a degree of fantasy and illusion was present. But I guess I was fortunate to have spent the first 16 years of my life in a relatively peaceful place with food. So perhaps this helped. But I didn't really have any clear evidence that it was possible. It was a genuine memory, though. But then eating disorders disrupted my life between 17 and 25 years old. And those intuitive eating years that I'd had as a child, they just felt like a distant dream. Anyone that has ever experienced extreme dieting knows well that you can't easily walk back across the bridge to the land of food peace. Dieting disruption changes your mindset. Everything is impacted. And we know that from the Minnesota Starvation Study. Good and bad foods now exist. There's so much guilt around food, it's just horrendous. And fullness, something that was just normal function once upon a time, now is this terrified state that you cannot bear. Now, I experienced all of these things, but something inside me still knew that recovery was possible. At 23, on a Find Myself trip to Australia, I decided that I was going to train as an eating disorder therapist on my return to the UK. I really wanted to support others and offer them the help that I hadn't received myself. I was idealistic and I was hopeful. And I was deeply wounded. I was carrying a lot of unprocessed trauma. In Australia, I was still bulimic, chaotic, but this therapist's vision was now a beacon of hope on my horizon, a lighthouse blinking and drawing me towards the shore. Now, to help others, I would need to change, and I recognised I would someday, need to emerge from bulimia to heal. Because how could I support others if I was struggling myself? It wouldn't be authentic. What I didn't realise in my naive and youthful enthusiasm was that my identity was not really tied to having an eating disorder. Now, I don't know why that happened, and I'm so thankful for this, and I'm not quite sure how I escaped it. Now, this was something that unwittingly and unintendingly saved my life, because I understood I had bulimia, but in my mind, this was just a temporary state. I was going to recover. I was going to become a therapist. And I really believed this wholly in my core, even though it didn't seem very realistic. My identity was very much focused on fulfillment and purpose. The eating disorder was not me. Yes, I liked being thinner. I enjoyed the sense of control and oblivion I achieved through numbing out through food. Yes, I liked the freedom to stuff myself to beyond fullness with desirable foods, with potentially no consequences due to purging, although the consequences were dominant and real. Sore throats, acid reflux, tiredness, stomach pain, low self-worth, shame and a deep sense of inadequacy. And my external life mirrored my inner state. I had no boundaries, I people pleased to the nth degree, and predictably, I then attracted narcissists, over-controlling bullies, and other people pleasers, as I wasn't capable of a healthy and functioning relationship with myself or with others. And I pushed myself to crazy limits, and I was exhausted and weary, and I was deeply inauthentic, as I would show up in the world with a glossy coping front as though everything was fine, while dangerously spiraling in deep negativity behind closed doors. I'm not shaming myself here. I was doing the best that I could at the time. The eating disorder was a life raft and offered a safe place back then. But knowing and believing that I would recover somehow, someday, it saved me. It helped me pursue further roads when many routes had led to dead ends and failure. I kept picking myself up and having another go. So I tried multiple approaches: therapy, coaching, white knuckling it, nutrition, talking to friends, reading books, changing my environment, anything and everything I was going to try. And I restarted recovery numerous times. And through all of it, though, my identity was that I'm going to get there. Eventually, I'm going to recover. I believed it to my deepest core. Now, this is such a valuable perspective to take on board, as your identity shapes who you become. Research shows that people who are successful in giving up smoking, for example, tend to identify as non-smokers. Whereas if you identify as a smoker, even when you're not smoking, you are much more likely to relapse. Now, it's not uncommon in the eating disorder space that your identity is strongly linked with your eating disorder. Now, this is particularly understandable if you were diagnosed at a young age, perhaps you engaged with professional services and you were given all these labels, and it might be really hard to shake it off. And the eating disorder may almost feel like a part of you. You know, maybe it's been around for so long. It feels safe, it feels known and predictable, and you may not like it, but you don't know who you are without it. Maybe you're into fitness and you're labeled as the healthy one. Maybe you identify as the skinny one. Your friend group see you in a certain way, and it can be very hard to shake these labels. And perhaps you've been praised continuously for your body shape, even though internally you've been struggling. And this can be such a dangerous place to be in. And you may derive a great deal of comfort and safety from your identity being interwoven with your eating disorder. You may not know who you are without it. Now, if you relate to this, offer yourself deep kindness and compassion. The eating disorder has likely been a saviour through difficult times, even if holding you back now. But when your identity becomes unhealthily dependent on your eating disorder diagnosis, this can keep you stuck, and it can drive you to repeat these destructive cycles which feel so familiar. There's little headspace for hobbies or friendship or pleasure. Everything's about food and body image, and the real world just blurs into the background, and the eating disorder dominates your life and fills up every crevice. So how do you begin to rebuild a new identity and let go of the eating disorder? So valuable insights can be understood through James Clear's work, which talks about 3 levels of behaviour change. Now, James is the author of the best-selling book Atomic Habits, which has sold more than 20 million copies worldwide. Do check it out if you haven't read it. I really recommend that you do. It's got some great information in there. Now, James describes 3 levels of behaviour change. Number 1, outcomes. Number 2, process. And number 3, identity. Now, if you're not on YouTube or Substack and you're listening instead, you can put James Clear identity diagram into Google and it will come up. James Clear identity diagram. Now, all levels are necessary in implementing change, all these 3 levels, but we need to really focus on identity for permanent shift. So let's look at the different levels. Number 1, outcomes. So outcomes are surface level changes, focusing on doing a behaviour differently. So in eating disorder recovery, it might include adding an extra snack, maybe practicing with a forbidden food, reducing mirror checking or something like that. So within the eating disorder treatment world, CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, places a lot of emphasis on this layer. Now, this is recognised as a valuable approach, but it's not the holy grail, and it can be criticised for not going to the deeper route, okay? Because focusing on outcomes alone in recovery without the deeper change around identity could result in those behaviours continuing and just having to rely on willpower to make those changes. So it can be really challenging to rely only on behavioural outcomes in recovery. You're at risk of simply muscling through the behavior change, whereas your identity is still very attached to the old version of you. Okay, number 2, process. So the process layer of change looks at changing habits and systems. It could be planning meals and creating structure around eating to provide a scaffolding and self-care and safety. It might be implementing self-soothing practices throughout the day to calm your nervous system to avoid a build-up of frustration and stress, which accumulates in binging or overeating. Now, the process part is again vital and necessary, but it's unlikely to be sustained alone without deeper identity shifts. So let's look at identity. So the marvelous magic happens when you work on identity shifts. So what does this really mean? So a change in identity involves shifting your self-image, your worldview, your deepest beliefs, and your judgments of yourself and of others. Your identity is what you believe about yourself. So for example, I'm the type of person who takes care of myself and nourishes my body. Then, if you believe this, the goal is not simply to eat more. The goal is to become the person who values and respects their body with great nutrition for optimal physical and mental well-being. So the goal is not only just to stop body checking, but to become the person who values their worth beyond appearance variables, that deeper identity shift. The goal is not just to stop binge eating, but to become the human who regulates their emotions and becomes grounded wholly in themselves. Because if you're metaphorically rearranging deck chairs on the sinking Titanic by toe dipping with behaviour change, with an identity still tightly wrapped up in the eating disorder, change will be hugely challenging. Your identity is crucial. Now, building of a new identity takes time. And research demonstrates that once you believe in an aspect of your new identity, you're more likely to act in affiliation with this belief. So if you identify as genuinely being in recovery and healing from your disorder, you will start to take the actions that align with this. Alternatively, if you're only focusing on process and outcome recovery habits, which conflict with your identity, it's hard to put these sustainably into action. So how do we shift identity? Number 1, really think about your core identity, the values and beliefs that you would like to embody. So things like health, freedom, kindness, achievement. So what does healthy eating really look like for you? It's probably not restriction or binge eating. What does freedom actually look like? Is it eating out, being spontaneous? What does kindness look like, particularly if you're being kind to yourself? What does achievement look like on this journey? Could you reward yourself and really plan it out? Number 2, visualize. How do you want your life to look? Think about embodying all the senses. Imagine the movie version of yourself. Number 3, take mini steps to practice and embody these changes. So act first with the thoughts and beliefs of someone stepping into their power. Now, with my YouTube channel, I initially booked a studio in London to practice doing some video podcasts because that was stepping into the identity of that person who is on YouTube. And from then I've been able to then record episodes from home because I started to believe I am a YouTuber. So you can heal from this and get to the next level of the video game with that new identity. So let's talk about the summary of this. Eating disorder recovery is far more than embracing weight gain or stopping binge eating or other behavioural change. It's about healing from within and embodying change from an empowered root of an identity shift. So when you introduce the forbidden food, you embody the identity of someone in recovery. You feel that energy, and it will feel strange and unnatural to begin with. But the more you repeat behaviour, the more you integrate the new identity into your being. Small, repetitive habits add up to meaningful change when rooted in constructive beliefs. You start to believe and self-trust in the process. So, decide who you want to be and start to become this person. Prove it to yourself with small wins. Be brave, be consistent, be committed. You can do it. Do share with me any of your own thoughts about identity change and recovery. I would love to hear from you. Do share in the comments. Thank you so much for being here. Do follow, rate and review or subscribe if you're on YouTube. Do check out my Food Freedom app if you're looking for more support. And I look forward to sharing another episode with you very soon. Thank you so much for listening to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. Bye.